Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, back with the patch 13.14 rundown, our second patch of Runeterra Reforged. So where we're at right now is that, we've had some balance ups and downs. Things got pretty wild there with like Draven and Ezreal Legend and things like that. But overall, we're actually in an okay spot right now. A lot of competitive stuff happening right now on the weekend as I record this. But we're finally seeing actual Legend diversity, whether it be Poro, Ornn, Ezreal, you name it, there's a bunch of things being chosen. Comp diversity, there's a decent amount of reroll comps that are working. We're still seeing, the Azir comp do well, Challenger comp do well, stuff like that. So our goal here is to just keep that going forward. And the way we're choosing to do that here is buffs. This is going to be a patch with a lot of buffs, still a few nerfs, but trying to keep the nerfs very light, only for things that we know absolutely need it. But instead, a lot more buffs, trying to look at the things where it's like, these are dead shops. These are things you don't want to play. Like, who's playing Demacia right now? Who's playing Cassio reroll right now? And trying to open that up more. So that's kind of the big goal of this patch. And so let's dive right in and see what we're looking at. First off, we got some system changes. First off, Nox Crya, not one of the more popular portals, but a fun one where you get 3 items. We banned What the Forge from appearing. That augment will no longer appear. Just causes a lot of bugs, so that's fixed. All right, the first of our portal reworks, Petricite Forest. This used to give 150 health to everyone on your team. Boring. Now you will start the game with 3 component anvils. So this gives you a chance to build your best in slot items. Everyone's going to try to build some early items, push that. So pretty cool to have 3 extra components. Should be a nice solid, not going to be one of the S tier portals, but should be kind of fun. Warlord's Palace. This is the one that gives you sort of the old treasure dragon at 4/7. We want this one to be fun and exciting, so we are lowering the reroll cost from 2 to 1 gold. Should allow you to play that and still have fun. Sweet. One thing to note though is I did notice while testing PBE there's a text bug. It'll say 2 gold on the text. I promise you it's 1 gold. It's working. So should be more fun. And then finally, Yuumi Zoom Zone. This is the one that used to say at 20 seconds start overtime. Again, not very exciting. We kind of went crazy here. The replacement is pretty wild. When you buy XP, gain an additional 2. So this is going to allow you to hit 9 much quicker. If you're one of those people that really hates the level 7 meta, this is the portal for you. You're going to be able to go to 8 pretty quick. So Yuumi's Zoom Zone and your little legends move fast, which is always fun. So there you go. All right, strongest unit. A lot of confusion right now on strongest unit and how it works. This is for things like Demacia, Shurima, Lesser Jeweled Lotus, stuff like that. Now it's consistent. The way it works is, first thing it does is it checks who has the most items. Okay, cool. You have the most items, you're the strongest. If there's a tie, it's the most recently fielded unit, which means if there's a tie, all you have to do is take a unit out, put it back in, it's now strongest. So now you have much better control over who is the strongest. This should help things like Yordle, Demacia, and again, I think Lesser Jeweled Lotus is going to be wild now because of this. All right, on the loot system side, Krugs, Wolves, and Raptors will now always drop at least 2 orbs. It's just, nothing felt worse than doing a Krugs and seeing 1 orb pop out of Krugs. Even if it was fair, it wasn't fun. So fix that. Mono Reave across the board has been lowered from 35% to 30%. This mostly affects Ahri, Freljord, and Shroud of Stillness. All of those things were performing very well, and 35% Mono Reave is pretty strong. So there you go. And then finally, Training Dummy. This is the super serious change. Training Dummy now has 50 AD. You might be asking, why does Training Dummy have 50 AD? Well, literally the only reason is so that if you're playing Wandering Trainer and it gets Deadeye, it can proc it. That's it. So just a fun change, but hopefully should make Wandering Trainer, which is a really fun augment, even more fun. So cool. All right, on the traits side, Darken. We're trying to do some Aatrox buffs here, and you'll see some Aatrox buffs later. But Darken will respawn now after 4 seconds instead of 5. So hopefully it makes Aatrox even easier to come back out and do some cool stuff. Demacia, again, as I mentioned, Demacia, not really a trait people are leaning into. You see a lot of 3 Demacia for things like, your Kale Poppy comp, but no one's really going Demacia vertical. So we're giving it back some of that armor and MR, 5, 10, and 25 if you can somehow hit 9 Demacia. Okay, Multicaster. So it turns out on PBE, there was a time when Multicaster was 50, 100%. Basically 50% reduced spellcasts. And we nerfed it to 40, right? We nerfed it to 60% reduced effectiveness. Well, we screwed up, and we only nerfed 2 Multicaster, not 4. So if you've ever felt like 4 Multicaster was a big spike in power, it was, turns out. So we fixed the bug, but this is a big nerf to 4 Multicaster. So 4 Multicaster, now instead of 2 spells doing 50% effectiveness, we'll do 40% effectiveness. So it is a big nerf to Multicaster, be aware of that. But now it's the numbers it was always supposed to be. Piltover. T-Hex damage has been lowered just a little bit. Piltover, we're still, looking at it in the future, but for now we're just lowering its power a bit. This is mostly to make up for the fact that a lot of the units that play around Piltover, things like Zeri, got buffed. So we had to kind of compensate for that so that every game isn't just who got Piltover. And then to help out poor tournament players like Rain that maybe sell their T-Hex too quick, you cannot sell your T-Hex until after it gains its power and charge. We've seen a few times where players were like in a hurry try to sell it and miss out, so that shouldn't be an issue anymore. All right, Rogue. And don't worry if you're already freaking out seeing, oh my god, Rogue buffs. The champions are getting nerfed, so don't worry. But nobody really plays 4 Rogue. It's just not a trait. People play 2 all the time, but nobody plays 4. So we're increasing the power of the bleed at 4. And quality of life stuff. Rogues are now temporarily CC immune while dashing. So this should help them be able to dash more consistently. And rogue units will no longer cancel their dash if triggered during a cast animation that disallows movement. So this should help rogues get to the backline more consistently and power up for rogue. Now again, I know what a lot of you are thinking. It's already like Zed meta, good champs like Echo, Viego. Don't worry, we got you later. Just stay tuned. Shadow Isles. This is an interesting one, but right now the shield duration, there's nothing worse than playing 6 Shadow Isles, having this giant shield, and then it just disappears. Feels pretty bad. So we're increasing the duration. Now, it says we're nerfing the amount of instances to proc it, but if you've ever tried to play Gwen carry, you know that, like, she just doesn't proc her shield sometimes. So you might be wondering, why are we nerfing this? Well, we fixed a bug. It now counts all instances of damage instead of just attacks. So what was happening is Gwen's spell was, like, counting once or even 0 as an auto. That's fixed. So now they proc it very quickly. And so to compensate, we had to lower the number of procs. But generally, this should all just be a buff to Shadow Isles. You should get your shield more consistently, and the trait should be much more playable. All right, Slayer. One of the few big trait nerfs. Slayer is very strong. Just for putting in 2 Slayer, you get 15% Omnivamp. That's very powerful. So we're lowering that back down to 12%. And then the damage increase threshold at 75% basically means most of the time Slayers are doing a truck ton of damage. We're lowering that back to 60%, so you have to get them low before you get that double damage. So again, this is one of the bigger nerfs in the patch. To Slayers get really out of control at like 4, 5, and 6. This should hit Kale. This should hit Zed a little bit to get them back down to what we want that bar to be. So, all right. Continuing on, Strategist. This might be a surprising buff, but one of the things is we're seeing things like Lux and Azir be played in Strategist, but not in Shurima and Demacia and Sorcerer and stuff like that. And a big part of that was just Strategist was giving way too much AP to the team. So we're lowering the amount of AP that Strategist gives so that we can put buffs in those champions a little later. So you'll see some Strategist champion buffs and things like Lux, but the trait itself was giving too much AP, so that hopefully those champions can be played in other compositions as well. Techno Genius. This is Heimerdinger's trait. Mechanoswarm will now actually properly work if you have more than 1. So if you want to play 3 Mechanoswarm, it will actually burn 3% now. It was only burning for 1. To compensate, we lowered the magic damage a bit, but now it finally works. Void. Void is a really good opener. If you have 3 Void, that Remora actually hits pretty hard, takes a lot of damage. It was kind of doing too much damage for how good it was, so we lowered its base AD quite a bit. But 6 and 8 Void, not really doing it except at low elos. Baron is still very good at low elo. But we're buffing Herald. Honestly, I think it still needs more than this. but we're trying to go light here. So Herald gets buffed, and then Baron gets to be a little bit more durable so it can unload. It still falls apart pretty quick to some late game DPS, but should make Void more of an option. All right, on the champion side, again, trying to focus on mostly buffs here. Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia's cycle just takes way too long if you don't have a Sunfire. You have to cast the first time. That applies the wound. Then you have to cast the second time to get the bonus damage from the wound. Takes forever at 40 mana, even with 2 Invoker. If you had a Cassiopeia 2 in the early game, she could be an okay item holder, but you were never excited about it. You were never like, yes, sweet, Cassiopeia. So we're trying to change that. So the mana goes down to 30. This makes blue buff Cassiopeia a lot better. She was supposed to be one of the premier blue buff holders. Obviously, to compensate, we lowered the damage a bit, but this is still a DPS up by a lot. So Cassiopeia should be a lot better. Cho'Gath, I think we over-nerfed on PBE. Cho'Gath reroll is supposed to be kind of fun. See how many stacks you can get up to that like 1,000 health, bonus health from the stack. Get those big bites. So we're buffing 2 and 3 star HP on kill and the spell HP ratio. This should allow you to go, Cho'Gath. And by the way, you're seeing the Cho'Gath buff, Malzahar buff. You can also see why we nerfed Void 3. Probably didn't need to have all the power in Void 3 openers. Speaking of which, Malzahar does get a spell buff here. He's still kind of an idiot. He still misses his spell a lot. But at least if it hits, it can kind of hit hard now. You could actually play Malzahar as an item breaker. And he will actually destroy half their shield. So if you're ever up against like an Ionia comp, or not an Ionia comp, a Targon comp or something like that, you can break through their shields with a Malzahar. Jhin, the 3 Ionia opener. If you have a Jhin, an Aurelia, and a Set, you were set. Pun intended. So Jin's Ionia damage is coming down. We still want Jhin to be good in like a 2 Deadeye comp, and Jhin will still be very powerful, his spell's not being nerfed. But that 3 Ionia did need to come down to make the opener's bar kind of even. And so again, this should make more, level 4 comps kind of viable. Continuing on at level 1, Orianna got kind of a rework here. Basically a big simplification. The problem with Orianna was, imagine very often you would have like your Orianna and Malzahar against their Samira and Cassiopeia. Your Orianna would shield herself, and then it would explode and do nothing, and you'd miss out on a ton of spell damage, and it sucked. So now what it does is she just shields an ally, great, still shields them, and then her next auto does some pretty big damage. I don't think Orianna reroll is going to be crazy, but I think she can actually be a decent item holder for like a Death Cap or an Archangel, and do some decent damage in the early game before you transition. It should make Orianna not as much of a dead unit. Samira, very much like Cassiopeia. We want Samira to be something that you can play early Noxus, Challenger, not that those comps need buffs or anything, but Samira herself. So she's going to cast more often, allowing you to shred that armor quicker, get through that. To compensate, the spell damage goes down a little, but she'll be casting more often. And again, this is meant to be a buff to Samira. Viego is paying the price a little bit of the 4 rogue buff, so Viego power goes down. Shadow Isles also got buffed. So it's just his stab damage. The stacking damage is still just as good. So this is a very light nerf. I know you're looking at this and saying, wow, this seems like a 10% nerf or bigger. No, it's just the stab, not the stacking. So shouldn't be too bad on Viego, but he did need to come down. And then finally, Renekton. This is a small change, but it is a buff. Is that we slightly reduce the wind-up time for Renekton's cast. So he'll be able to spin quicker, and maybe you won't have those times where he like starts to wind up and then dies and misses out on a heal. That could kind of feel bad. So small buff to Renekton there. All right, on to 2 costs. A lot of 2 cost champions getting buffed here. Ashe. If you put items on Ashe, you were silly. That's silly. Don't put items on Ashe. Well, now you can. The spell damage is going up quite a bit here. So an early Ashe 2 with like a Deathblade could do some work here. So give Ashe a try. Should be good. All right, this is probably one of the scarier buffs, but Galio. Galio's basically been a non-existent tank. Would you rather have a Galio 2 or a Maokai 2 right now? Kind of the Maokai. So Galio's getting quite a bit of buffs here. His mana cost is going down. At 3 star, the spell DR is going up to 25%, and then he's going to heal a bit more. So this should allow Galio to help both Demacia and Invoker be a real tank. should be good to go. All right, Jinx. So I think a lot of people were shocked to see Jinx buffs. What? Jinx is already doing very well. That's true. Jinx is doing well, which we're glad. Glad to see Jinx doing well. But there is a bit of a nerf in here, which is that now only every other rocket from her spell counts as an attack for items like Hurricane. So for those of you that were running like Hurricane, Ginsu's Jinx, and getting tons of stacks, that got cut in half. To compensate, the spell gets to hit a little harder. So it should be power neutral, give or take, and make her less bound to those specific items. But that's why she's getting buffed. Soraka, this is probably another scary buff because Soraka, a lot of high elo players really enjoy a Soraka 2 in the early game. Can be very good. We didn't nerf her healing any. We did buff her damage. The idea here, hopefully, that like you could play Soraka carry. From what I've gathered, I still don't think it's quite there. There might still be work to do, but Soraka 2 is still going to be a very powerful unit, especially with the Taric buffs, which you'll see in a bit. So expect to see a lot more Targon Invoker openers that can be really scary. All right, Swain, another champion that, like, Swain is amazing stage 2, and then you put items on him, and you hit stage 3 and 4, and he falls off a cliff, and Sorcerer can't really play the game much. So we're trying to make sure he can actually cast, like, more than once a fight ever. So we're lowering his mana cost. His spell goes down in duration, which means he'll do a little less damage, but it's actually a buff here because he was mana locked during the spell, and so that's going to allow him to recast again, gain that extra health, and be tanky for even longer. So again, this should help Sorcerer, Strategist, which you saw got nerfed, and kind of help those comps out a bit. Teemo's interesting because if you look in the data, Teemo's doing really, really well, just never with items. People are playing him with Sona, Vel'Koz, maybe you play him with the Kale and Poppy comp, but you never play Teemo. So we want to reward you for playing the 4-star Teemo. We're buffing the 4-star Teemo spell damage. And again, this also compensates a little bit for both the multicaster and the strategist nerfs that came with it. Warwick. A lot of people are surprised to see this one also. But Warwick is getting a buff here. He is meant to be a tank for Zaun. If you want to put tank items on him, he can do well. He should be able to do that. This will come with a Ravenous Hunter nerf later that you'll see, obviously. But do want to make Warwick a little stronger here. And then again, we talked about not too many nerfs here, but Zed definitely cranking out the damage, especially at 3-star, and with the rogue buffs and the rogue consistency changes. So Zed is losing 5 of his AD. Remember, this is base AD, so this is actually like an 8% damage nerf alone. And then also the 3-star spell is losing 10 base damage, which is, again, multiplies very highly. So this should be a decent size nerf to Zed. He's getting hit with this. He's getting hit with the Slayer nerf. So, but hopefully he'll feel like a 2 cost and not a 3.5 cost. So, all right, Akshan. Again, another one that I think a lot of people were surprised to see on the buff list, but small damage buff. His ability can no longer be interrupted by CC, so nothing worse than starting your ult and then getting Jarvan ulted and losing your entire spell. But this is mostly to compensate for the fact that now Hurricane and Ginsu's, etc., only count every other shot, so you're not getting like 7 free Hurricane shots per spell cast. So that's kind of the balance here. Akshan will not be as bound to Hurricane. Garen, well, I mean, we over-nerfed Garen a bit. Obviously, this was a bit of an overreaction to all the Zeke's building that was going on. But Garen should not feel like a dead unit in your shop. If you get a Garen 2 on 2/2, you should be excited, not sad. So we're kind of rebuffing him quite a bit here. Mostly in the AD space, so he goes back to 2 base attacks per spin. His spin AD goes up. The attack speeds per spin goes down a bit, so he can't scale quite as hard. But his baseline should be a lot better. So, Karma gets a buff here that looks pretty big on paper. The big thing is 6 Invoker Karma wasn't that great because so much of the power was bound in the Ionia bonus. So now if you get an early Karma and you want to run 4 Invoker without Ionia, it should actually feel a lot better. But if you're just running Karma in a Ionia comp as an extra, she'll be about the same. So again, this is mostly to buff Karma outside of Ionia. Katarina, again, mostly paying for the sins of Rogue here. Goes down in power a little bit. She was also a little too good. We do still have some feels to work on with her. A lot of the time she'll cast her spell and like 1 dagger will hit or something. So still working on that, but even in that, with the meantime, she did need to come down in power a small amount. All right, Rek'Sai. This is meant to be power neutral to easier to play. If Rek'Sai doesn't get her execute, her threshold with that true damage, she feels so bad. But if she did, she'd basically go infinite and go pretty wild. So we're lowering the heal that she would get from that, so you'll need to build things like Bloodthirster more, but making it easier to get to that true damage level. And so hopefully making Rek'Sai a little bit easier to play and not have to be the exact 3-star champion she needs to be. All right, probably the single biggest change in the entire patch, Taric. You're looking at these numbers and you're going, my God, these numbers are insane. And that's because Taric was bad. Taric was a trait bot. If you ever tried to put tank items on this guy, you regretted it. You felt terrible. And that really sucks for people who are trying to play Targon or Sorcerer. Well, that's going to get changed here. Taric is meant to be a 3-cost tank. If I have a Taric 2, it should feel better than your Maokai 2, your Galio 2, whatever. And so Taric's gonna be a beast. Lowered his mana cost quite a bit, raised his spell shield quite a bit. He's gonna be shielding things. Now remember, when he shields, it absorbs everything. So that shield gets drawn pretty quick, but with something like 3 Targon, 2 Sorcerer, these can be some big shields. So expect to see a lot of Taric. That's probably the biggest change. Taric is going to be a playable tank. So be on the lookout. All right, in the 4-cost space, a lot of green text here, which is good. We don't want the game to be all rerolls. I know a lot of you may be thinking all these 1 and 2 and 3 cost buffs, it's going to be a reroll meta. No. Aphelios gets 5 AD, which again, base AD. That means this is close to like an 8% buff. But Aphelios also benefiting from things like the Targon buff. So Aphelios will be doing more damage. Sweet. Gwen, small buff here. This is actually really minor. But when she gets that mist that gives her the extra armor and MR, that'll last a little longer. But more importantly, we've also improved her dash AI, and she'll now try to continue attacking the current target if she's able to. No more like switching targets and like I snip you down to 10% and then leave. So she should be a little bit more consistent. All right, Lux. I think seeing that we just hit Lux in the last patch, to see her come back up, maybe raising a lot of eyebrows. But again, this is with the strategist nerf. Lux gets buffed a bit to do some damage. And the bigger change here that I think is really nice is her ability can no longer be interrupted by CC. There was nothing worse than having your Lux cast just start into a Jarvan ult and lose it all for no freaking reason. It felt so bad. So Lux will do what Lux is supposed to do. We're hoping that we're going to see some 6 Sorcerer Lux, maybe some 7 Demacia Lux, but hopefully this gets her in a good spot. And then Sejuani, it's funny, this looks like a small buff, but it actually works out to be a really big buff. She'll now gain her shield immediately on cast instead of after a delay. There were way too many times where she'd start to cast and then die anyway. She will get her shield much quicker, so Sejuani should be a really good tank this patch. Urgot, a small mana buff of 10, so he can cast a little bit more often. This should help Zaun and Deadeye. But also 30 starting mana, so he can get that first cast, move into like the enemy backline, and start proccing off of his legs a bit. So, small buff for Urgot there. Yasuo, one of the few nerfs here in the 4-cost space, but we're actually really happy with where Yasuo is. He's doing what he's designed to do. Might be frustrating, I get that, but he's doing what he's designed to do. The only thing we don't like is that you build him like RFC, Edge of Night, Bloodthirster, 3 defensive items, and he still one-shots your backline? Feels pretty bad. We want him to have to at least put like an IE or a Deathblade in there to actually get some big damage. So we're lowering the spell AD a bit. Again, we want you to put at least 1 damage item on this guy for him to unload. So small nerf to Yasuo there. And then Zeri. I think obviously Zeri fell off a bit from the last nerf. Very bound to Piltover. She can still work in Piltover. She gets the 5 AD buff, same as Aphelios. Her overcharge will last longer. This hopefully makes her a little less bound to Ginsu's. Part of the problem was you needed as many shots as you could get in that 6 seconds. Now it'll be 9, 9, 15. And I'm calling it now, by the way, the 15 at 3-star. She's still going to struggle to kill super tanks at 3-star, so this doesn't fix her 3-star problems. It's kind of a small band-aid. And then finally, there was a bug with Robotic Arm because of the way her attack system works in our code with the whole 3 attacks, that it couldn't quite work. She would like proc her first auto, and then the other 2 would cause a delay that would cause Robotic Arm to not proc. TLDR, we fixed it. Robotic Arm actually good on Zeri now, and so that should also help her be even better. All right, 5 costs. Again, lots of green text. Aatrox. I think some people struggle to make Aatrox work. He's pretty hard to get to work. You already saw the Darken buff earlier, but we want if you get an Aatrox 2 with like IE Bloodthirster Titans on in level 8, you should be strong. You should be strong. And so we're trying to make that true. And so we did this with 10 more armor and MR, 10 less mana to get started, higher spell AD percentage, his revive animation speed goes up, and his cast animation speed goes up. So all of this should make Aatrox quite a bit better. All right, Ahri is another one. Now, Ahri is one I think a lot of high elo players will tell you is still very, very strong. She didn't really need like a numbers buff, and I agree. But we reduced the overall cast time of Essence Thief. So now she'll go back to attacking quicker, and we significantly reduced the windup of the 3rd cast. So she should just feel better and have less of a 2-second dance before she casts. So hopefully that makes Ahri even better for a 5 cost. Bel'Veth, you see a nerf here, but it's minor compared to the buffs. She gets less power from AD here, so the lash is going down in damage, but she'll move faster while in Empress form, and the big one here is that Bel'Veth no longer continues casting on nothing if her target dies with no targets in range. So what would happen is, especially if you didn't have RFC on her, she would like start attacking somebody, they would die, and then she'd just do nothing. She'd just sit there and go like this and hit nothing. Now it will at least move to the next target, even if they're out of range, which should make her less RFC bound. Now, don't get me wrong, RFC is still an amazing item on her. You should still build it, but no more wasted spells, and that's a very big buff to Bel'Veth. And then finally, Shadow Isles Rise. We still have a lot of work to do on Rise, to be honest. I think next patch, Rise is going to get some big attention. But for now, Shadow Isles needs to cast more often to actually be useful. So lowering that to 40 out of 80. And there you go. That is Champions. On to items. Dragonclaw and Radiant Dragonclaw. Who's ever excited to get 2 cloaks? Not a lot of people. So Dragonclaw and Radiant Dragonclaw get some extra MR and some extra HP regen. So hopefully Dragonclaw is a little better. All right, Locket of the Iron Solari. This is probably the most controversial item change for sure. What you're seeing here is the shield value has gone up from 200 to 300, and the duration goes up to 8 seconds, which means it can actually last a while now. But it only buffs one ally on each side, very much like Chalice and Zeke's. Now, some of you might look at this and go, wow, that's a big nerf. We're actually hoping this feels like a buff, because you can concentrate the power, run your 3 frontliners, give them all that Locket value, maybe tank on the left with items, tank on the right with items, and Locket in the middle, and not have to feel like you always have to position in that line that kind of griefs your positioning. So it should feel like a bit of a buff to those who are willing. It'll take some adjustment to get used to how to use it. But again, something like, especially like a 4 or 6 Bastion line with this, that's a lot of effective health. So do keep an eye on it. If we have to go further from there, we will. But again, this is intended to be a buff. And then Radiant Locket of the Iron Solari works the same way it did before, but has been underperforming. So giving it back some of its power. Sniper's Focus. This is a kind of a for fun change, but I think it fits way better thematically. Sniper's Focus now works like RFC. It grants +1 range. So Sniper's Focus on Bel'Veth should be pretty cool. But to compensate, we lowered the damage per hex down to 8%. This will mean things like Sniper's Focus Ahri get a bit of a nerf. But I think this is a more fun item. And then finally, for some of you that maybe saw in like the data mine stuff, you see things like Radiant Sunfire went from 60% burn to 2% burn. What's going on here is we've changed the tooltips so they accurately reflect burn per second, right? If you see 2%, that's 2% per second. Seeing Radiant Sunfire say 60% was very confusing. You had to do math. We don't want you to do math. TFT players can barely read. So now it says what it says. Just a tooltip change. Nothing changed in their power. So there you go. All right, augments. Spoils of War 2 and 3, after the big Draven nerf, are underperforming a little bit. So we re-added a small chance to drop multiple gold on stage 3 and beyond. This is meant to buff Draven at gold and prismatic. Tiny Power 1, 2, and 3. I think this is an augment that isn't being talked about a lot, but is actually very, very good. Not many people right now are playing Veigar, but especially since we're going to fix Veigar's bugs, which you'll see in a little bit. Veigar would actually kind of skyrocket in power, and we were expecting him to be S tier. So we're preemptively kind of hitting Tiny Power a little bit. Caretaker's Ally. This is Bard Silver, got a rework. Playing it on PBE, it seems really, really good, so give it a try. But the way it works is every time you level up, you gain the same random tier 3 champion. So if you level from 3 to 4 and it gives you Echo, well, now when you level from 4 to 5, you're going to get an Echo. 5 to 6, you're going to get an Echo, etc., etc. So definitely an augment if you take. You're probably playing a 3-cost reroll, but who knows? Maybe you know, I don't know, hit something you're not really interested in and you move on. So, yeah. Medium End Shopping has been underperforming as a gold augment, so we're going to try it at silver. We do need more exciting silver augments, and so hopefully this should be a fun one that you're willing to take. Obviously, it can't give you also 3 gold. That'd be too good. But Medium End Shopping as a silver augment should be kind of fun. Unified Resistance 1. Currently a really, really good augment for a silver, just lowering its armor and MR by 2. Young and Wild and Free. I love this augment, but unfortunately right now you only take this augment if you're in first place. Like, literally the only time you take this augment is if you're on 3-2, 100 HP with a really strong board, you take this augment. Otherwise, you don't. We want to change that. We want people to have fun with this augment. So it now also grants a random component. So now maybe you'll consider like, well, I get a component and I can get carousel advantage. So should be fun. Built Diff 2, the gold one. Underperforming a lot, gets a buff, mostly in the attack speed, a little bit health as well. Dueling Gunners, this is mostly to compensate for like the Jinx and Zeri buffs. So Dueling Gunners is going to come down in power. We don't want the absolute peak of these augments to be too strong, so that gets nerfed. Know Your Enemy. The problem with Know Your Enemy was it was way too similar to another augment, the corruption one. I forget the name of it, the one that poisons. Contamination? I don't know. Anyway, it was too similar, so we reworked it. Now it says your units deal 15% increased damage. If you and your opponent have the same traits activated, they deal 20% damage instead. So it's still kind of a generic plus damage modifier, but really focused around if you and your opponent have similar stuff. Long Distance Pals peak was way too good. I think we've seen some challenger players really figure out how to make this augment really shine, and it'll still be good, but lowering it just a bit. Loving Invocation. This is very similar to the Gunner thing. We saw a lot of Invokers get buffed. You know, we saw the Soraka buff, the Cassiopeia buff, the Taric. So we're just lowering this augment's power so it's not such a high ceiling. Mana Burn already gives you a Shroud, which is amazing. Burning 3% of your health per second is also really, really good. That goes down. Ravenous Hunter, overshot it a bit by 1. So stats per stack go from 6 to 5. We still want this to be a playable augment. It's still supposed to be fun. It'll be good, just not quite as OP. Stable Evolution. This augment continues to really overperform, especially at low elo. And especially with the Malzahar and the Cho buffs, as well as the Baron buffs, we did need to lower this augment, so this augment goes down. Caitlyn. I think this buff is really big. I think this is one of the ones that will be underappreciated, but Caitlyn as a legend has kind of been underpicked. Stars Are Born now gives, instead of 3 gold, 6. So not only do you get that big board spike of the 1-star and the 2-star, or 1 cost and 2 cost, but you also get the gold. That's huge. So I think expect to see a little bit more Caitlyn. Suppressing Fire. This is the Deadeye one. This augment's not great, but if you're playing like 2 Deadeye and you want to lower your enemy's attack damage by 35%, cool. I don't know. I think this augment still needs more work. The Boss. This is the Set Hero augment. I think some people have made this work, but it's a little too hard to get to work. So again, raising those stats by just a bit. When Set comes back, he should be a monster. And it turns out giving somebody that much extra AP and attack speed is pretty cool. Three's a Crowd. This is the one where if you play a lot of 3 costs, you get a bunch of health. This one, I don't know. We might end up undoing this one, but the 3 cost version was just so much weaker than the 2 cost version. We made them equal. We'll see, though. Maybe that ends up being a mistake. Excuse me. Sorry. All right, Built Diff 3, much like Built Diff 2, getting buffed. Cool. All right, speaking of Bard, we already buffed his Silver Augment. His gold stays the same, but his Prismatic is also getting a buff. So now you get the Radiant item at level 7. We see everyone pretty much gets to level 7 pretty consistently. Getting to 8 is pretty hard sometimes. So now it's level 4, get a component, level 6, get a full item, and level 7, get a Radiant item. So if you're willing to take this Prismatic Augment, you will be up a full item and a component from everybody else at level 7. So it should be the highest peak augment, but you have to get there. Endless Hordes. We brought this augment back and severely undershot its power. Might go down as one of the worst augments in history, averaging something like a 6.7. So we're buffing it, of course. It gets 6 more gold, and the HP reduction goes from 40 to 20. We'll go from there, but that is a pretty big buff. Remember, it's still plus 3 units, so cool. Level Up. We're really happy with where Level Up is. It does have one of the highest peaks. It has a very good win rate. We're giving it the smallest nerf here. The initial XP goes from 4 to 2. The biggest thing this does is you don't get level 4 for free. You will have to spend if you want to get that, so it will make you take a little bit of early damage in the early game. Very small nerf to Level Up, though. Starter Kit. Speaking of Caitlyn, she gets even better here. We kind of over-nerfed Starter Kit, so now we're going back to you don't get items, but you will still get your 4 cost for free. So at 2-1, you get a 4 cost. At 3-1, you get another one. And then at 4-1, you get the third one. So Starter Kit will be hopefully an easy Prismatic for a lot of people to play. And then Wellness Trust. We're happy with this augment, just making it a little easier to play. You can get the health at 40 gold instead of 50 gold, so you don't have to hoard quite as much if you want that health back. All right, now for the small changes. We haven't had a ton of small changes recently, but just a few to call out here. Bruiser 4, kind of an awkward middle step between Bruiser 6. A lot of people played Bruiser 2 for the 100 health for the team. A lot of people played Bruiser 6 if you're leaning into like Rek'Sai. Not many people are playing Bruiser 4. Small buff. Deadeye 6, kind of laughable. Deadeye 6 should read every 3 seconds, kill someone. So buffing that up a bit. Juggernaut 4, this is to mostly help things like Garen, maybe Set and the boss, stuff like that, the Warwick. But Juggernaut 4, its max DR is getting raised a bit. Now remember, it goes from a min to a max, so it's a very small buff here. And then Zaun, Robotic Arm, we fixed the bug with Zeri. And because of that, we kind of need to nerf it down. So it goes from 60 to 50%. That way Jinx can actually be excited about other ones as well. So small nerf there. All right, and then bug fixes. A lot of bug fixes. We'll continue to fix lots and lots of bugs. I'm going to try to go fast. Here we go. Rolling for days now correctly counts towards frequent flyer and return on investment. Neat. Rolling for days are no longer consumed by Think Fast. Great, if you ever held them for that long for some reason. Summons and training dummies can no longer be selected as the strongest unit for Shurima, Demacia, and Lesser Jeweled Lotus. You hear that, Wandering Trainer? No more trolling us. Removed a small window where Darius could gain mana between his casts after resetting. Technically a small Darius nerf, technically. Removed Cursed Crown and Golden Egg from double up game mode. It just caused a lot of problems. Golden Egg unit description no longer says it will hatch into a Draconic Champion. Cool. T-Hex can now gain mana on the first fight after cashing out if her ability is unlocked. Great. Contagion, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Contagion, that's what it is. Contagion augment bonus damage now additively stacks with other sources instead of multiplicatively. It was secretly OP. Warlord's Palace and Targon Prime now work in hyper roll. Great. Fixed a bug where Vel'Koz could occasionally fail to multicast if his first cast killed the target. Cool. Yasuo can no longer use his ability on untargetable units. No more Yasuo Zephyr. Lesser Jeweled Lotus and Jeweled Lotus now always grant the correct amount of critical strike chance. So there's your Vhagar legend buff. Bastion combat VFX now properly play on the center of the champions rather than their feet. So now they're not standing in a bubble. Buried Treasure 1, 2, and 3 now stack properly instead of disabling the most recently selected one. So small buff to Ezreal if you wanted to play 2 Buried Treasures. Fixed a bug where Demacia could give an additional Radiant item when a stronger unit auto-filled an army from bench. Cool. Fixed a bug where Jeweled Lotus augments were not adding their critical strike together. So this was if you ran like Jeweled Lotus and Lesser Jeweled Lotus, they wouldn't work together. Now they do. Again, another Vagar legend buff. The tooltips of Zeke's Herald, Bramble Vest, Edge of Night, Mortal Reminder, Static Shiv, Gargoyle Stoneplate, Redemption, Protector's Vow, and Hextech Gunblade now match their Radiant counterparts. Cool. AFK Augment should now always properly allow you to see the shop the round after its effects expire. Great. But this one's great. Bug fix final V2. Think Fast will no longer appear on Augment rerolls. For real this time, Pinky promise. I think we've seen that in the patch notes 3 times now, but this time for real. We swear. Loaded Dice can no longer be offered as part of the Targon Prime Blessing. Loaded Dice can no longer be offered in Hyperroll Armories. Loaded Dice can no longer be offered in Double Up Assist Armories. We're basically removing Loaded Dice from the game. It's just a weird item. Time to get rid of it. Fixed a Sona Spell Fizzle. Cool. Riftwalk tooltip now correctly states that the Augment grants a Kassadin. Cool. Fixed a bug where the Ionia bonuses would deactivate after summoning a unit during combat. I believe this also affects the Freljord one for anyone asking. Talia will no longer throw rocks at knocked up targets when stunned or under Zephyr. Cool. The stun one's actually a pretty big nerf to her. Fixed a bug where Yasuo's spell would trigger enemy Talias to cast their spell on him. Cool. Lucky Gloves Augment will now properly give you sparring gloves if you have the component buffet augment. Cool. Shoplifting now works correctly even if your bench is full. Yasuo will no longer lock up and damage his target if he died mid-cast. Dreaming Pool can now grant Rise if Invoker is your top trait. Rise can now appear on carousels. Rise now appears in the end of game screen. Great. Zeri gets full value from Robotic Arm. We already said that. Rek'Sai will no longer execute enemies through death prevention effects like Edge of Night and Heimerdinger Repairomatic. And Ahri now correctly gains double mana per second while in her Ionia spirit form. So technically a buff to Ionia Ahri. And there you go. Decently sized patch. Again, should be a fun patch though because it's mostly buffs. Mostly opening up new things. I'm excited for Taric. But yeah, so there you go. That is it for this patch. The next patch, you can expect things, some Rise adjustments, maybe some other reworks, things like that. And the other good news is that this will be my last patch rundown solo, because starting next time, guess who's back? Back again. Kent is back. He's our friend. Kent will be back, joining us for patch rundowns from here on out, so should be cool to see him back in action. And there you go. All right. This patch goes live on Wednesday. Hope you all have fun with it. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.